Hey there, good morning everyone and welcome. I'm Errol Barnett in for Vladimir Duthier. It is 10 a.m. here on the East Coast, and at this moment we're gathering all the big news events taking place across the United States and all around the world. The Trump administration is slashing 20% of high-ranked positions at the Pentagon. What does this mean for the Department of Defense, which has already been hit by mass firings? We'll address that. Also, Canada's new Prime Minister is getting ready at this moment to sit down with President Trump at the White House. Tariffs and trade, of course, will be on the agenda after weeks of verbal sparring between the two from a distance. And cardinals are arriving at the Vatican for final preparations ahead of tomorrow's conclave. And one of these cardinals will be the next pope. But which one of them? What you need to know about the process and how it will impact the more than 1 billion people who consider themselves Catholics around the world. You are in the right place. This is CBS News 24/7. All right, we start with our focus in Washington. Canada's newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading to the White House for what really is a high-stakes meeting with President Donald Trump. Now, these two leaders have been fighting it out over tariffs and Trump's consistent push to make Canada the 51st state. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is tracking all of this for us from the White House and joins us now. Natalie, good morning to you. Many could say that Carney wouldn't have been elected if it were not for his stance against Donald Trump and tariffs. So what can we expect today?
Yeah, Errol, that's why watching this meeting is going to be so fascinating, the tone and interaction between these two leaders, because as you noted, Carney campaigned on speaking out against President Trump's actions when it comes to tariffs and talking about Canada as the 51st state. And he, vowed to Canadians to stand up to this administration. But now he is here meeting with President Trump for the very first time at a time of these heightened trade tensions when a number of tariffs that are impacting Canada remain in place. If you think about auto parts, steel and aluminum, also 25% on goods not covered by that previous U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement. So tariffs, no doubt, will be at the top of the agenda during this initial meeting. But in speaking to business stakeholders, the Business Council of Canada, they say that they hope this meeting serves as an initial opportunity to really reset this relationship and really talk about some of these broader trade issues, so critical because these two North American economies are so intertwined. Canada, of course, a top trading partner of the U.S.
And Natalie, what's interesting is there's not a lot of warmth in the language coming from the White House. The Trump administration in many ways seems somewhat indifferent to Carney's visit, describing this as really an all-working appointment. Why is that?
Kind of nonchalant, and especially given the heated rhetoric that we've seen leading up to this, it's really hard to know what to expect. Prime Minister Carney, for his part, previewed he's expecting difficult but constructive discussions. Errol, I also want to note, we've seen so many different foreign leaders come here to the White House and meet with President Trump, especially as these trade negotiations continue with dozens of countries. The White House kind of saying, this is yet another foreign leader coming to try and make a deal with President Trump.
And Natalie, I want to ask you quickly about another news item that's just crossing the wires that we're getting here in our newsroom, which is that Columbia University has just announced it's laying off nearly 180 employees. And this is in the wake of the Trump administration cutting federal funding for research grants. They're doing the same thing as far as cutting funding when it comes to Harvard as well. What can you tell us about this development?
Yeah, yet another escalation and impact of this intensifying fight between the Trump administration and these top universities. As you noted, Columbia announcing just this morning that they would have to cut around 180 employees who were supported by these federally funded grants, saying that that represents about 20% of individuals. In a statement, they said in part, moving forward, we will be running lighter footprints of research infrastructure in some some areas and in others maintaining a level of research continuity as we pursue alternate funding sources. Unclear at this point what research will be impacted. But we know, Errol, that back in March, the administration announced it was canceling around $400 million in federal funding to Colombia, citing anti-Semitism. This is in response to pro-Palestinian demonstrations, that we've seen in recent years. But Colombia also notes in this new letter that it hopes to continue to try and work with the government to restore some of these partnerships, because as we know, as we've been hearing from these universities, their research is so critical to what they do and to really helping the public at large, Errol.
We're watching some of the country's leading research institutions really shrink here during the Trump administration. Natalie Brand with all the latest. Thank you for that. Now, as we mentioned, President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney are meeting at the White House soon this morning in hopes of getting a trade deal done. But we want to show you this interview with Fox Business from yesterday. You had Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick really not sounding optimistic about the two reaching an agreement. Listen.
I think it's really complex. I think this is really complex because they have been basically feeding off of us for decades upon decades upon decades, right? They have their socialist regime, and it's basically feeding off of America. I mean, the president calls that out all the time. Why do we make cars in Canada? Why do we do our films in Canada? Come on. So I think the president's going to have, I think it's going to be a fascinating meeting.
I would agree with that. This is CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady with me here in Studio 55 to discuss what we should expect. I mean, that sounds like someone trying to temper expectations and say, don't expect a massive agreement to come out of the U.S. and Canada discussing things today. But they are huge trading partners. So what are you looking forward to?
So I'm glad that Natalie mentioned that USMCA agreement, because ultimately that's something that can be renegotiated next year. And that is not just Canada and the U.S., it is also Mexico. So some sort of large-scale trade agreement we aren't likely going to see until that gets tackled. But particularly, you think about the sort of barriers and the things that both sides have said leading up to this point. I mean, one is the trade deficit. That is something that the president is going to be laser focused on, getting Canada to buy more goods from the U.S. He's also talked a lot about the flow of fentanyl and that being a piece that he wants to tackle. The other thing are these non-tariff trade barriers. So it's not that Canada will tariff goods coming from the U.S. into their country, but they subsidize domestic industries in order to make it cheaper for their citizens to buy Canadian versus to buy American dairy products, for example. The last thing I'm looking for is, I mean, this is a new prime minister for Canada. They're going to want to show strength, and you also have a president who also has that as a priority. So I'm curious to see some of the egos going back and forth.
Well, you say egos. You know, we saw a blow up in the Oval Office between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky, allies. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something similar today, even if it is just posturing and positioning. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is on Capitol Hill this hour, and he's defending trade policy to lawmakers. We saw at a conference yesterday, he said, quote, never bet against America. Nice phrase, but is Wall Street really buying that?
You know, to some extent, we have seen Wall Street come back since that April 2nd Liberation Day that the White House was calling it. But we have also seen Treasury yields rise, the dollar value fall, and both of those things tell you that investors are not as excited about investing in U.S. assets, and they're not as excited about the U.S. economy. Whether that's something that lasts for forever, I mean, that's really, it's going to be trade deals that put an end to that. But right now, there's just a lot of skepticism, a lot of wait and see.
Yeah, show us is what they likely are feeling. Kelly O'Grady, great to see you. Thanks so much.
Of course.
All right, now we move on to this. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has issued a new order to slash senior ranks across the military. A minimum of 20% of all four-star generals, admirals, and some others are now set to lose their jobs. Hegseth says these cuts are part of a plan inspired by the success of World War II. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now from the Pentagon with more. Charlie, we were just looking at a video that the Defense Secretary posted to social media in announcing this. He says less generals, more GIs. Structurally, for the uninitiated, what does that really mean?
Well, Errol, first of all, a secretary can be prone to alliteration and snappy titles. In that very brief memo that you watched, so it was accompanied by a video clip where he said in World War II there was one general for 6,000 troops. Now there's one for every 1,400. He says more generals and admirals does not equal more success in that video he posted on X. So he says it's not a slash and burn exercise meant to punish high-ranking officers. It's kind of a deliberate process that may see a restructuring with sort of the combatant commands, if I want to break it down. So how those cuts are going to be made and to who, we don't know yet. 4 stars tend to be the heads of the individual branches of the services. So, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. In charge of combatant commands like CENTCOM, which is probably the most familiar to you and I, INDOPACOM. There had been some discussions of merging other COCOMs like EUCOM for Europe and AFRICOM, put those together. And maybe even NORTHCOM, which covers North America, and SOUTHCOM, which covers South America. There's already been a lot of overlap in that region when it comes to the beefed up border initiatives. But, even before he came in here, he said that he had it out, really, for the generals. He criticized the DOD for being too top-heavy. He criticized individual members for what he called woke generals. And within weeks, he had already fired the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, and also the head of the Navy, who's a woman.
So in many ways, Hegseth is following through on many of the things President Trump said he wanted to do with the military. So you could argue that it's why Trump was elected and Hegseth is carrying it out. But do any of these cuts really save money? Because Hegseth has also said he wants the Defense Department to have $1 trillion budget and have the most ruthless fighting force on Earth. So how do these two things square?
That's a good question. And as you said, we kind of saw this coming. Hegseth had criticized the DOD even before he was under consideration to become the defense secretary. But in terms of cost saving, well, there are roughly 38, 40 4 stars, generals and admirals across the military. If you take out 20% of them, I don't know, do the math, it's 6, something like that. If you put all their salaries together, it's just over $1 million. There are other benefits, obviously. So $1 million versus $1 trillion, not really going to have that much of a huge impact in terms of the budget. What might be more significant is he's also called for a 10% cut really across the board with any flagged officers, and that's 900 individuals. And I think we have to consider that this kind of goes hand in hand. It runs tandem with the restructuring of the entire military. So there may be personnel cuts in what we're about to see. But more significantly, there may be terms of resources and facilities and merging other areas, most specifically the Army, which he's already called out.
Really interesting, highly noteworthy stuff. Charlie Daggett, great to chat with you, joining us from the Pentagon. We continue our focus on this now, and we'll bring in former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, no stranger to the folks here on CBS News 24/7. He's also a CBS News foreign policy national security contributor. H.R., great to have you with us once again. Should this be described as a blow to the Pentagon? Because what I wonder is these messages and these changes from the top and the signal it gives to the men and women on the front lines doing the difficult work day to day. What message does this send, in your opinion?
Errol, I think this is a positive message, actually, because what the secretary has done is really refocused the department on what it's for, which is combat readiness, and then when you're on mission, combat effectiveness. And there have been a lot of distractions, under the Biden administration. There are efforts to advance, I think, some social agendas, what I would call like radical DEI, which is equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. And some of these other programs that are being reduced, like the Women, Peace, and Security program. And so, like in the military, we judge one another based on our sense of honor, our commitment to the mission and to one another, the willing to sacrifice for your nation and for your brothers and sisters in arms. And that's how we judge each other, right? Not by like identity categories. So I think that's been positive. With the flag officer reduction, I think that's okay. Of course, what you have to do is evaluate it, Errol, like what effect does it have on your ability to integrate all arms and joint capabilities on missions with the headquarters that exist with those 4-star headquarters, the combatant commands in particular, but also influence. You want to assess the degree that it has on your influence in the world. because these flag officers are a lot of times the key interlocutors, with allies and strategic partners around the world. But I think the kind of reduction that is being recommended, I think that's fine. I'm all for, reducing overhead if we retain the capacity in our armed forces. What I'm more worried about, Errol, are some of the elements in the defense budget that indicate maybe, I think, a priority on hardware and some new systems rather than the capacity in the services. And I'm talking about the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Space Force.
Glad you mentioned capacity, because Hegseth has said he wants to have the most modern and lethal, fighting force on Earth. But you need humans, you need intelligence, and of course, people like yourself with experience to really execute missions intelligently. So I'm wondering what you make of the comparison, the analogy he makes to World War II as a justification to fire what are deeply experienced military personnel who you just laid out are crucial to executing the Pentagon's mission.
Well, I hope what happens is that our most experienced and capable officers stay on, but maybe at a reduced grade. We have extremely talented officer corps, in the field grade ranks, like lieutenant colonels, majors, and colonels. And it's okay if some of these jobs are downgraded a grade, or a couple of grades, and we reduce some of the overhead. I think combining some headquarters does make sense. I'll tell you stick around long enough in the military, you come full circle, because it used to be that European Command also had a responsibility for the African continent. Maybe it goes back to that, a Western Hemisphere Command. That might make sense, Errol. So I'm okay with cutting overhead as long as we keep our fighting capacity. What you are alluding to, hey, you don't grow an experienced, knowledgeable captain or major or sergeant first class overnight. So what I'm worried about, if cuts come, to the Army in particular, I think those would be unwise. I think the Army's way too small as it is now, as all of our services are. And you can't grow the kind of experience that you're alluding to overnight.
Right. And we did see with Elon Musk executing the Doge cuts early in the Trump administration that a lot of that seemed haphazard. They had to reverse some decisions. So we hope that these cuts, as they roll out, are surgical, as you established there. We've run out of time, but great to have you with us, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. Please come back anytime.
Hey, thanks, Earl. I think what you're saying is you don't want to do ready, fire, aim. You want to do ready, aim, fire, Precisely,
precisely. Great to see you, H.R. We'll see you again soon. We've got more to come for you this hour. There were new attacks in Yemen. Look at this footage. Explosions heard in the country's capital moments after Israel warned people to evacuate the main airport. We're going to bring you all the details we have on this next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We bring you developments out of the Middle East. Israeli forces say they've carried out airstrikes over Yemen's capital this morning, targeting the city's international airport. Now, this comes after Israel carried out airstrikes on Yemen yesterday. You're looking at the aftermath. This was in response to a missile attack launched by the Iranian-backed Houthi rebel group over the weekend near Ben Gurion Airport. For more on this, let's chat with CBS News foreign correspondent Remi Inocencio. Looking at him, joining us from our London bureau this hour. Remi, good morning to you. What more can you tell us about what seems to be an escalating situation between Israel and Yemen's Houthi rebels?
Yes, escalating tit for tat, Errol, here. The IDF confirmed that it did launch what it calls a wave of airstrikes and that it has now destroyed the Sana'a International Airport in Yemen's capital. The military there says the airport is now completely disabled. This airport is Houthi controlled, and social media posts claim to show explosions, plumes of smoke there in that area. The military also says that it hit several power stations around the area and that a concrete factory was hit just north of the capital. The claim there by the IDF is that was used to make infrastructure for the Houthis and for tunnels. No reports of any injuries or deaths just yet out of this incident, though. But Israel's military did warn people around the airport to evacuate, so there was a warning there. And it's easy to see this as retaliation, as reaction to what happened on Sunday. That was the Houthi missile strike on Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. That had never happened before. That missile managed to evade Israel's high-tech Iron Dome system. Several people were wounded in that strike. Ben Gurion, the only international airport that serves Israel, pretty much if you go in through air, you will land at Ben Gurion. Many U.S. and European airlines canceled their flights, and those haven't resumed so far. But to your point, escalation continuing from Sunday through Monday with that port we saw as you just opened this segment, and then now we have the strike on that airport.
Yeah, serious developments indeed. Remy Inocencio across all of it. Remy, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You bet.
We now turn to this. Police in Washington state arrested 30 demonstrators who occupied an engineering building. This is on the University of Washington's campus last night. The pro-Palestinian protesters were demanding the college cut ties with Boeing. The group also blocked off streets and set fire to dumpsters. At this time, it's unclear how many of those involved are actually students at the university. The case of a Columbia University student who was detained by ICE and then released returns to a courtroom today. You all remember this moment. The government is appealing a judge's order that led to this. This is Mohsen Madawi obtaining his freedom once again. He exclusively spoke with Lilia Luciano in his first sit-down TV interview. Watch.
What do you suppose, if you have any idea why they wanted to do that instead of just taking you right away?
I don't know why. But what I know is this is a betrayal to the Constitution of this country and to the process. I've done everything the right way. I've gone through the process. I've applied the right way. I showed up for my interview. I shared and answered all of the questions honestly. And I said I am willing to defend and protect the Constitution of this country.
We've got CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez here with us now to speak about this. Camila, great to see you.
Good morning.
Today. So at this moment, a federal appeals court here in New York will hear arguments in the case of not just Madawi, but also Rumeysa Öztürk. That's the Turkish Turkish student at Tufts University, excuse me. Why are we seeing that hearing here, and what should we expect?
So in the case of Mrs. Öztürk, the federal appellate court in New York will be hearing argument over whether the Justice Department should be required to move Mrs. Öztürk to Vermont. That is what a lower court judge ordered ICE to do because she's currently detained in Louisiana at an ICE detention there. But that order by the lower court judge was stayed by this federal appellate court in New York. They will decide whether or not to extend that stay or to lift it, allowing her to be transferred to Vermont. In the case of Mr. Madawi, the Columbia University student, who was arrested by ICE too, the court will hear argument on whether the Justice Department has grounds to appeal the lower court order that led to his release. The Justice Department is saying that Mr. Madawi should go back to ICE detention because he poses a danger to his community, which was rejected by the lower court judge in Vermont. So we'll see how these cases play out.
And it really gives you a sense of how eager the government is to win in these cases.
That's right.
You've also reported that the U.S. currently is trying to negotiate deals with several countries, including Angola, Equatorial Guinea, to accept migrants whose home countries won't take them back. Help us understand what that is about.
Well, Errol, the Trump administration is mounting an intense and aggressive diplomatic campaign to convince as many countries as possible, regardless of their human rights records, to take as many people as possible from countries like Venezuela that limit or reject U.S. deportations. And we know that they have already brokered agreements with countries in this hemisphere in Latin America like Costa Rica, El Salvador, Panama, and Mexico to take third country nationals. But now we have learned through internal government documents that the administration has also been talking to countries outside of this hemisphere in Africa and Europe, countries like Angola, Eswatini, Equatorial Guinea, Moldova, Libya, and Rwanda to also take people from other countries. But there are a lot of questions legally and politically about how these agreements would actually work out if they are finalized.
It's incredible when you see the map that we just put up there, and it's really spread around the world. So remarkable that you were able to get into these documents and see that this is happening. We'll stay close to you to get more of your reporting. Camilla, great to see you. Thank you very much. All right, still to come for you all, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem defending President Trump's immigration policies on Capitol Hill. You see her right there. Now, this comes as top lawmakers consider a boost in border security funds in their next budget. Also, 3 former cops face state charges for the beating death of Tyree Nichols. We'll look at when the jury could get the case. You're in the right place, streaming CBS News 24/7. At At this moment, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is on Capitol Hill. She's before the House Appropriations Homeland Security Subcommittee. Now, this comes amid recent upticks in ICE arrests and one day after the administration announced it's offering, get this, $1,000 to people in the U.S. illegally who choose to self-deport. CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Scanga joins us now. She's all across this and all the other big headlines. Nicole, good morning to you. What have we heard from Secretary Noem so far and this deal about $1,000 to immigrants in the country illegally who choose to self-deport?
Errol, good morning. Good to be with you. And yes, Secretary Noem touting the Trump administration's announcement of those $1,000 stipends, plus covering airline tickets for undocumented immigrants who choose to self-deport to their home countries using a U.S. Customs and Border Protection app. She also spoke quite lengthily about FEMA's review council. She said that she's put it in place to fix a broken system and to return power to state emergency directors, of course, that making some critics nervous ahead of hurricane season. She also spoke about Real ID, of course, that post 9/11 mission that enhances state-issued IDs. The deadline to get your Real ID is tomorrow. Only 81% of the country compliant. We also heard some criticism from Democrats, notably Ranking Member Lauren Underwood saying that ICE enforcement right now undermines other national security priorities and that DHS is, quote, cashing checks it does not have.
Really interesting, and so many hot button issues that the secretary has to manage. When it comes to the administration asking for what would be a huge spending increase to bolster deportations and border security, can you help us understand what's happening at the southern border right now? Because I know that there's also some pushback from Mexico when it came to the U.S. kind of militarization of the southern border. And now we have this deal of perhaps $1,000 for folks who self-deport. What's happening down there?
Yeah, I mean, not only have we heard pushback from Mexico about some of the militarization, but we also have seen efforts by the Mexican government to work together with federal law enforcement to try to, quote unquote, close the border. We've seen Secretary Noem in recent weeks put millions of dollars into an ad campaign encouraging individuals to self-deport or, quote, be hunted. And Mexico has, of course, pushed back on this. But this is interesting, Errol, at a time when the Trump administration is really slashing the budget of so many major departments, right? The Department of Justice, HHS, they're actually proposing this whopping $40 billion boon to DHS. You know, of course, that's dependent on Republicans passing this sort of sweeping reconciliation package. But that is a 65% increase to current levels. And in a summary that was issued days ago, the Trump administration says this is really going to enable DHS to implement the president's mass removal campaign, to finish construction of that border wall we heard so much about during the first administration, to procure advanced border security technology, to modernize the fleet of the Coast Guard, to enhance Secret Service protection operations. Of course, a big concern after Butler. You know, the Trump administration's budget proposal, though, would also slash nearly $500 million from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That's a notable 17% reduction for the top cyber defense agency, plus hundreds of millions of dollars, Errol, to cuts to FEMA's grant program. Again, just deepening that concern about the nation's federal disaster relief and some of the other ways in which FEMA funnels money to states and communities.
And before we let you go, Nicole, has there been much reaction yet to this development of offering that $1,000 to folks who self-deport? Because I know that it was only just announced, I think, in the past 24 hours.
That's right. It was just announced yesterday. Now, we did anticipate this announcement. The administration had been alluding to such an announcement for several weeks now. We had seen a similar program set up in Australia to the tune of roughly $5,000. As to whether or not, there will be migrants who take the president up on his order, I think, remains to be seen. A lot of uncertainty here. One of the incentives, however, of taking this program is the hope that if individuals self-deport, if they follow this Trump administration protocol, they might have an easier time re-entering the country in a future administration. So that sort of legal protection, one of the incentives beyond just the cash value of $1,000 and airline tickets home.
Right, and comparing it to the cost of litigating, detaining, and et cetera, and deporting, it would actually cost the government less, perhaps the logic there.
Right.
Nicole Scanga, great to chat with you, joining us from our D.C. bureau.
Thank you.
All right, jury deliberations, they could begin at any moment for these men. These are the 3 former Memphis police officers charged with second-degree murder in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. Now, they were already convicted of federal charges last year. The officers have pleaded not guilty, though, to the state charges. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is breaking down the final stages of this trial. You see him here joining us live now. Omar, what can we expect to happen today in court? I believe we've just heard almost the end of closing arguments. Is that right?
That is correct. Tadarius Bean's attorney had closing arguments yesterday, and today we're expecting closing arguments for Demetrius Haley and Justin Smith. And then afterwards, the prosecution will have a final rebuttal before the judge hands it over to the jury to decide. Now, keep in mind, each of those defendants is facing 7 charges, the top being second-degree murder, everything from aggravated assault also, aggravated kidnapping, down to official oppression. And once they hand it over to the jury, we're going to have to wait and see what they decide.
Now, listening to what we're seeing, I think, was the prosecution making closing arguments as well. It's a horrific case. The details are so disturbing. The jury has seen so much video, body cam video from the moment before this man died. What does the jury, though, need to specifically consider, taking into account that they were already found guilty of federal charges?
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the cameras from the body cam, but there was also almost like a sky cam. It's these cameras that Memphis has that are on poles in certain areas. That recorded kind of a bigger picture of things. Now, the defense is arguing that Tyre Nichols was not complying with getting handcuffs and that the officers were just going through their procedures to try to get this person who was not complying into handcuffs. And their argument is once that he was finally put in handcuffs, he wasn't touched at all. Now, the prosecution is saying something a little different. They're saying Demetrius Haley, kind of pointing to it, we're saying after the beating that Haley took a picture of it. The defense is saying, well, that was for documentation. Prosecution is rebutting that, saying, then why did he send it to 11 different people? So it's very contentious here, and the jury's going to have a lot to process.
All right, Omar, we'll link up back with you as soon as there are more developments. Thank you very much. All right, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has confirmed that screens at Newark Airport, right in his control tower, they went black for at least 30 seconds last week. Now, the National Air Traffic Controllers Union says that folks there weren't able to speak to pilots landing and taking off. Imagine the stress. At least 20% of air traffic controllers are now out on leave due to the trauma from that incident, and they'll be away for up to 45 days. And this is the ripple effect of that. You're looking at a live update of flight delays in the New York metropolitan area. We've got an average of 160 minutes at Newark International Airport. If you're flying, consider JFK or LaGuardia. We also will keep an eye on this as it gets better or worse. We also want to show you video of this. Hailstorms across the southern U.S. yesterday. It's not every day that you see palm trees and pools covered in the icy precipitation. And of course, this can do serious damage. Today, officials are warning there should be more hail and perhaps even some tornadoes could be on the way. Will it come to where you are? Well, CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore should know. He is looking at that and all the other big issues that commuters, too, taking flight should consider. Hey there, Grant.
Could be issues, Errol, for sure. And we're trying to keep weather out of the issues going over the Northeast. There in Newark was, like you said, 161 minutes. Look, weather could be an issue later today. We had a few showers move through earlier this morning. Those have cleared out. We'll see some peaks of sunshine in the New York area over the next few hours. But this area of low pressure continues to pinwheel itself over the Great Lakes states, over the Ohio Valley, just funneling in a lot of moisture off of the Atlantic. So as we get into the afternoon, we may find a few more showers and maybe even some severe storms over eastern Pennsylvania, right there through northern New York and just west of New York. So we'll watch that for potential travel impacts. It could impact you if you're going to be in the area as we go throughout the afternoon into the evening. You can see that spinning low pressure system slowly moving to the east, taking this area of stormy weather out of the northeast. But now we're tracking more storms across the south. Like you were just talking about, we've got ongoing severe thunderstorm warnings in effect, a couple of flash flood warnings as well, an enhanced threat. So that's a level 3 out of 5 for severe storms today. Damaging winds, some tornadoes, and very heavy rainfall and some hail all in the cards. We could see some rainfall rates today, upwards of 5 inches an hour come down. Very heavy rainfall. That system will move to the east as we go throughout the next couple of days. The northeast will actually see impacts from that low pressure system later on this week. Errol, back to you.
Yeah, always good to listen to Grant. Thanks very much, Grant Gilmore in Philly. All right, big question right now. Who will be the next pope? Could it be this guy walking in? The countdown toward the historic conclave is underway. You're in the right place. This is CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. Take a look at this live footage coming to us from Vatican City. There, cardinals are gathered for what will be the beginning of the conclave tomorrow. Cardinals will be literally locked behind closed doors to vote for the next leader of the Catholic Church after the death of Pope Francis last month. We have the perfect person to help us understand what comes next. CBS News papal contributor Candida Moss is here and can literally walk us through the process of this conclave. We've got the Vatican on the floor around us, where this is a tradition that has existed for hundreds of years. What happens tomorrow?
So tomorrow is just the first day of conclave. So there are prayers, of course. There are going to be some brief homilies then. And there will be meals, which will be the last opportunity for people to surreptitiously canvass for their candidate. The cardinals will take an oath in the morning that they will elect the person that they think will be the best pope, and then in the evening they will take their first ballot, and that's where we will see the front runners emerge.
Right, okay, and let's just give a sense of where we're standing. I'm out near St. Peter's Square, right ahead of where the conclave will take place in front of me. You're in the gardens. They don't even get to go outside into the gardens. They're locked inside. But what will they be negotiating? I mean, if it's not a specific cardinal that you can say who will be the next pope, what faction might come ahead?
Well, some things have leaked out from their discussions last week in the congregation of cardinals that met then. And it's clear this conclave is going to be a referendum on Francis's papacy. Conservatives who elected Francis, thinking that he was just going to be ministering to the poor, are concerned that if there's another Francis, we may see confusion in the church. That's how they see it. And so I think there's going to be a little bit of a swing back to the center of the Catholic Church. And there's going to be a lot of debate about whether or not we want someone like Francis. Everyone wants that Francis magic, but they don't necessarily want the Francis manifesto.
Well, you're saying he was criticized for sowing a bit of confusion inside the Catholic Church when it came to carrying out what has been described as more progressive policies that go against the traditionalists.
That's exactly right. So ministering to the poor, care for immigrants, these are uncontroversial for Roman Catholics, but reaching out to LGBT Catholics, welcoming back divorced and remarried Catholics, discussing the role of women, these are things that gave conservatives in the church pause, and they will be looking to find someone who's more mainstream, if not a conservative.
So I think the average time it takes to select a new pope is about 2 days. It's gone longer historically, but about 2 days. What would it mean, and what is the earliest that we would see a decision made? And what would that mean if we see the smoke come up signaling that they've made a decision quickly? What would your gut tell you?
Well, some have said that they will decide quickly, and that would probably be a compromise candidate, someone a little more in the center. Francis was elected after a day and a half. If the elections run to 8 days, and this is a very high-stakes conclave, this is the future of Francis's legacy on the line, and the
because
future.
he had appointed about 80% of the cardinals, right? So his stamp is really on this.
That's right. But if we go to 8 days, if we get to next Friday, the election changes, and they can only elect one of the top 2 candidates. The Catholic Church doesn't want a long conclave. It looks like they're divided, and it's supposed to be overseen by the Holy Spirit. And of course, no one wants to think that the Holy Spirit dithers.
Oh, goodness. And, you know, Catholic guilt, I can tell you from my family, it's real and exists. You don't want them feeling bad about anything. Candida Moss, great to have you here in our green screen and VR studio to really get another interesting look at what we will all be watching tomorrow. See you again soon. Thanks so much. Me. And, of course, you can watch our coverage of the papal conclave. Try saying that 10 times fast. All day tomorrow, right here on CBS News 24/7. We'll bring you special coverage beginning at 10:30 tomorrow morning. Stay right where you are. We'll be right back. Did you see this? It was a night of fashion and surprises at the Met Gala. This year's theme, Superfine, tailoring black style. The fashions focused on pristine tailoring and highlighted black designers. And here you're taking a look at some of the event's co-chairs. You're looking at Coleman Domingo, Lewis Hamilton, Anna Wintour as well. And take a look at, where is the young lady? Rihanna. That's how she pronounces her name. She closed out the carpet last night, revealing her third pregnancy with rapper A$AP Rocky. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore, always looking stylish, always gracing us with his great tailoring. With a final look at your forecast this hour. How does it look, Grant?
I'm just trying to keep up with your threads, Errol. But look, I don't think either of us can. I mean, the fashion at the Met Gala is always amazing. I mean, the creativity of these guys is unparalleled. It's fantastic. Let's get down to business here real quick, guys. A couple of areas that we're watching for severe storms today. Northeast could see some strong storms, maybe some gusty winds and hail. Watching out for a stronger threat, that enhanced threat for severe weather today across eastern Texas into Louisiana. All the culprits there: hail, tornadoes, damaging winds, and very heavy rainfall as we go across the lower Mississippi Valley later today. Otherwise, the West Coast, guys, looks really nice. 70s for Phoenix, all the way up into portions of the Pacific Northwest. Errol, back to you.
All right, always looking good, Grant. Thank you very much. And that does it for me, but I will see you back here at 7 a.m. for the CBS Morning News. Join me each weekday, but stay right where you are. After the break, Mugo Odigwe is live from San Francisco with this, all the breaking news from coast to coast. You're in the right place. This is CBS News 24/7.